Maybe recording. I think we're there. I think we are there. Now let's see. Oh, we've even got people already in the room. Oh, thank you. Wonderful. Well, I am so happy that you are joining me tonight as we talk about protecting plants for the cold season. You can see I've got my gnome all protected here. He's got his sweater on. He is ready for the cold season. So for those of you who have joined me in the past, you know that I often start out by saying, what's in your glass? It's our happy hour. It doesn't matter what you are drinking. What matters is that we're here together and we are having a good time talking about plants and gardens. In my glass is sparkling water. Yeah, it's boring, but and you know, whether you've got red wine, hot chocolate, hot tea, you know, whatever, we're taking a deep breath and enjoying each other's company and talking about something that's very life affirming, which is plants and gardens. So we will get started in just 2 minutes. We've already got 100 people in the room. Do you feel like it's crowded? We've got 100 people in the room. We'll let a few more people come in. Now, if you haven't joined me before, oh, Jean, that sounds good. If you haven't joined me before, know this. I take questions in chat. A lot of you are posting in chat what's in your glass, and I love that. Thank you. And it all sounds delicious. And that's where you put your questions too. So we're going to go through the presentation first, because sometimes in the presentation I answer your questions, you know, before you even type them in chat. So we're going to do that first. And then anytime you are ready, by all means, put your question in chat. If we don't get to all of them by 6 o'clock, I always take the ones that I haven't gotten to, I save them here in Zoom, and then I will put them up on the Hyannis Country Garden blog, either Sunday or Monday. I will answer them there. So you can always go and check on later on Monday afternoon. If you haven't had your question answered here, by all means, then you can go to the blog and see what your questions are and have them answered there. So it's 3 minutes after. Let's get this started. Let's get the share screen going. We're going to play the slideshow, and here we're off and running. And we are talking about winter protection. Winter protection. Here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about protecting new plants, all types of new plants. We're going to talk about existing plants. We're going to talk about ice and snow damage, perennials, cold damage, and of course, hydrangeas, right? Because hydrangeas are, of course, Cape Cod's signature plant. And after last year, a lot of people are nervous about their hydrangeas. This is what's happening in our landscapes now. Some of you have had a hard frost. I have had one hard frost down to 28. This was the morning. I try and take pictures whenever the first hard frost happens, partly because it's so gorgeous, but partly also to remember when it happened. And it's remarkably consistent for me here in Sandwich the first week in November. So if you've had a hard frost, you have seen this. If you have not yet to come, right? But this is the time of year when things do get frosty. I want to remind you, getting started, however, that plants protect themselves. This is very important to remember, because sometimes we think that we know better than the plants, right? And we don't usually. Plants protect themselves. And here is what they do. Now, of course, when a hard frost happens, this was my hard frost in Sandwich a few days ago, some of the plants, like the annuals, they get killed, all right? They've produced their seeds, they've done their job, they are ready to close up shop and leave, right? Because they have done their job by producing all those seeds. And that's what they do. And the seeds themselves are protected against the cold. Perennials, They get frosted and often will die to the ground. They're called herbaceous perennials, meaning the tops die, but the roots stay alive in the soil. So that's one way that they protect themselves. Now, plants that are what we call broadleaf evergreens, which are plants that keep their leaves over the winter, but they have broad leaves, not needles, they are all about winter protection too. Take a look at this holly. This is an American holly. You see how thick those leaves are? And you know, broadleaf evergreens, not only are the leaves thicker, but the tops of the leaves are often shiny. All of that is about winter protection and winter moisture conservation. So plants that are broadleaf and keep their leaves over the winter time, they're thick and they're all about conserving moisture. In fact, you're well aware if you live on Cape Cod that when it goes below freezing, particularly when it dips into the 20s, the rhododendron leaves shrink up, don't they? Some of them get as tight as a pencil. They get tight and round as a pencil. That is all about water conservation. The leaves fold on themselves to protect the stoma, and the stoma are the pores that give off moisture. So when they're folded up, they don't lose as much moisture through the leaves. They are protecting themselves in cold weather. Now, needled evergreens, conifers, they also, their foliage is all about winter protection. Those pine needles, they are thin, they are skinny, right? They do not release a lot of moisture over the winter. And so that shape of their needles is totally for protecting them and about conserving water in the winter when they may not be able to draw up water if the ground is frozen. Now, sometimes here on the Cape, our ground freezes, sometimes it does not. But the plants are prepared. If the ground freezes and they cannot draw up that water, they are ready to conserve it by having smaller leaves that lose it. Even plants like arborvitaes and this cypress, you can see those leaves are tighter, they're thicker, and that's all because they're conserving water. And some of the plants also drop leaves before winter. Right now, the pitch pines are dropping needles. About a month ago, the white pines did the same thing. That's also about water conservation because you see what they drop? They drop the old needles back here and keep the new ones alive. But because they're getting rid of the old, then they're reserving the resources, the water, they're reserving their resources to keep the new alive through the winter. And of course, the deciduous plants, they protect themselves by getting rid of those leaves altogether. This is my dwarf ginkgo. I love ginkgos because ginkgos shed their leaves in one overnight drop. It's almost like a cartoon where you could hear them go thump to the ground. That's what a ginkgo tree does. So deciduous plants lose their leaves, and that way they don't have to take care of those over the winter. And they've got all the energy. They've got carbohydrates and moisture, and carbohydrates are sugars. It's all stored in the limbs and the trunks and the roots of these plants so that next spring they have the energy to break dormancy. So most plants don't need our protection. Most plants, they know what they're doing, okay? And we don't have to worry about them. A good time saver for us. And sometimes nature protects plants for us, like when we have a heavy snow. This is the best protection you can have for many plants. Unfortunately, we don't always have it. And some people would say, fortunately, you know, snow is kind of a toss up. It inconveniences us on one hand. On the other hand, snow is the best insulator for plants there is, because in that snowfall is a lot of air. And that blanket of snow acts like a down blanket on our plants in the ground because it keeps them at an even temperature. It's not keeping them warm. It's keeping them at an even temperature, which is better for the plants, because highs and lows of temperature are harder on plants than if it steadily gets cold, it stays cold, and then it steadily gets warm. We don't know what the winter is going to bring, whether we're going to have this nature's insulation or not. But if you see a nice snowfall, just know that that is the best thing that can happen to your perennial and biennial plants. Now, what plants benefit from our protection? And this is what we're going to talk about today. And here are some of the things that can benefit from our protection. First of all, marginally hardy perennials, things that are zone 7, or for those of you who are true adventurers, some gamblers, zone 8 plants. We on Cape Cod are in a warm zone 6, and the closer you are to the ocean, the more likely you can get away with zone 7 plants. But zone 7 plants here are marginally hardy, and zone 8 are a gamble. Newly planted broadleaf evergreens, particularly, are might be in need of our protection. And plants that tend to splay open with heavy snows might need our protection. Now let's talk first about protection from cold, because this is something that I think confuses people. I think people think that maybe they can keep plants warm, and that's really problematic. And as I mentioned a minute ago, when the temperatures gradually get cold and stay cold and then gradually gets warm, that's not hard on plants. And the reason is that as it gradually gets cold, the plant actually changes the crystalline structure in its cells to protect itself. But those polar vortex dips, like we had on February 4th last year, that's what's hard on plants, because the plants don't have time to protect, to change their cellular structure so that they can protect themselves. And when it goes below freezing, very quickly, that is tough on plants. And we saw that last year. It's particularly tough on certain plants like lavender and roses and buddleia, butterfly bush, and heath and heather and crepe myrtle. There are some plants that have a particularly hard time with that sudden plunge. The reality is that nothing we do will protect plants from that. If we are going to have a mild fall and early winter, and then the temperatures go below 0, that's really hard to help. All right, that's hard to help. And unfortunately, we think, well, maybe if I wrap the plants, that would help. The problem is this: you're thinking about plants like we think about people. I can put on a sweater or a down jacket, and the reason that helps me stay warm is that it traps my body heat in, and so that holds heat in. Plants don't generate heat, and so if that wrapping includes a hot water bottle or a space heater or a heating pad, well, that might keep the plant warmer inside the wrapping, but the wrapping itself isn't going to keep it warmer in the case of a polar vortex, because plants aren't generating heat. And that's why, we sometimes cover plants with a sheet when a frost is predicted. The only thing that does is the frost settles on the sheet rather than on the plant. And if it's really a hard frost, if the temperature is going to 26, that's not going to protect those plants. Because again, the plants that are underneath the covering are not generating heat to keep themselves warm. So if wrapping doesn't protect against extreme cold, what does it protect against? Well, wrapping does protect against salt spray. So if you live near a road where the roads are heavily salted and the cars are kicking up salt, wrapping can help in that case. If you live near the ocean, like these people, wrapping could help protect not from the cold, but from salt spray. Now, I have to say, these look a little bit more like Halloween decorations than they do winter protection, because this is spooky, right? Spooky. And frankly, most of these look like junipers, and junipers don't have to be protected from salt spray. So I'm not sure, whether this was absolutely necessary, but it's an example of salt spray protection, as is this, right? I have seen people build walls that protect from the spray that comes off of the road. So wrapping can protect against salt. And if you've got particularly some plants that are more prone to salt damage, then that, might be a good idea. Let's talk a little bit about burlap, because burlap is commonly used to wrap plants. Okay, and we have a lot of burlap available at Country Garden, and there are certain cases when burlap is effective and some cases where it is not. Number one, you have to remember that burlap is not a great windbreak because it's so porous. You look at when burlap is unwrapped, right? You can kind of see a little bit through it. So it's not like it's stopping a lot of wind. It can stop salt spray, so that would be good, right? But you want to avoid wrapping burlap right on evergreen foliage. And unfortunately, this is what a lot of people do, right? I saw one year in Hyannis. Number one, it looks like the March of the Mummies. Would you want to live with this all winter? I would not. But number two, having these wrapped tightly like this, the burlap itself is likely to do damage to these plants. And the reason that the burlap is likely to do damage to these plants is that burlap wrapped right against foliage can actually wick water away from the very foliage that you are trying to protect. And so not such a great idea to wrap it right on the foliage. If you want to use burlap to protect either, somewhat against wind or against salt spray, putting stakes out and then attaching it to the stakes away from the plants is far better. And there are any number of stakes available. I took this picture today at Country Garden. You have your choice of small, medium, tall, wooden, with burlap. If you want to staple burlap to a stake, of course, the thing to do is a wooden stake. All right. And just everybody know that I don't usually answer hands because it's too difficult to go to question and answer people's questions when I'm going through this. All right. So don't raise your hand, type your question in chat, and I will get to it as soon as this talk is done. Okay. Because I may actually answer it for you before we get to chat. So if you want to staple or tie a burlap to a stake, okay, that works better. And in this case, the burlap was a little bit of a windbreak, and it was also for holding in the salt marsh hay that was on these plants. I'll get to this protection a little bit later because it was not that effective on these particular plants. But burlap can be a way of holding something like pine needles or salt marsh hay in. And if you were, for example, creating a wrapping around a fig tree outside, you would put stakes around that plant. You could put burlap around those stakes, and then you could fill the inside of that burlap protection with salt marsh hay or leaves or straw or pine needles. Okay. Now, some people use burlap to help protect a plant from the snow that slides off the roof. And I think that that was the idea for these plants, because these were yews, I think. Yeah, those are yews. All right. These are not plants that are prone to salt damage. They're not even plants that are prone to wind damage. But if a plant is close to a roof where heavy snow can slide off, those plants can get damaged. I'm not sure, once again, that I want to live with plants that are upholstered like this all winter time. I think there are better ways, more attractive, more functional ways to deal with snow damage, and this is one of them. This is a photo from my friend Lorraine Bellato. She is the author of Success with Hydrangeas, and she put this on her website as a way to show that you can take a couple of pallets, and I think on this pallet she might have put landscape fabric on one side or something, but you can easily make a little teepee that goes over the plants that are likely to get crushed by snow damage. And, you know, if you needed them taller than a pallet, you could put a couple of wooden legs or put these on top of a couple of cement blocks. And that makes a very effective and not so unattractive protection for snow that is coming off a roof. You could even, if you wanted to get fancy, paint some fun design on the pallets, couldn't you? Now, snow, of course, can also bend branches, and sometimes people wonder, how can I protect against this? There are some plants that are going to bend over in the snow, like these birches. If there's a heavy snow that is very wet and then it freezes, there are some plants that will bend over. You have to accept that we cannot control it. That's all. We can't control this. This birch tree usually springs back up. One year, this particularly long branch not only didn't spring branch up, but it just kept staying close to the ground, and we cut it off. And the others came up and took its place, because birches can be multi-stemmed. So fine, right? I don't worry about my hydrangeas with the snow. Some people clip off the flowers, because once these flowers get snow on them, they can pull the plant down. Now, this is a Hydrangea paniculata grandiflora, the old-fashioned PG hydrangea. And this is a plant that naturally the big flowers do pull those stems over. In fact, one reason to grow PG hydrangeas as a tree form, as you see here, is that then the branches can bend over almost like a weeping tree. And that's how I, view this, is I view it almost like a weeping tree. And frankly, I like how it looks with the snow on it in the winter time. But if you don't want hydrangeas to bend over like that, you can just clip off the flowers sometime in November or December, right underneath where the bloom is, right there. And then they are less likely to pull over in a heavy snow. Some plants are more likely to splay open in a heavy snow. This is a pencil point Japanese holly. It's not a plant that I am at all fond of, because I think over time it tends to degrade and not be as attractive. But this is also the problem with pencil point Japanese hollies. They splay open in a heavy snow. If you have these pencil point hollies somewhere on your property, I think you should think about protecting them from this. One way to do that is to coil something around it in December. This particular year, I used the foam covered wire to do that. You could use a very soft rope to do it. You could even use a ribbon to hold it up or to coil around and hold it together. Something that's going to be soft and put on loosely and removed in the spring once the snow is finished. Another plant that is likely to get damaged with a heavy snow are maples, Japanese maples, the dwarf Japanese maples, or plants like this that are small and weeping and have an area that catches heavy snow. And by the way, this is the argument not for cutting trees back, all right, that you should never prune a tree from the outside in trying to keep it smaller or turn it into a lollipop, because the more you do that, you create areas like this that catch heavy snow, and that's likely to split open. If you have a Japanese maple that has a lot of branches like this, sometimes people put boards like 2x4s underneath to support the biggest branches. So these red marks show where you would do that, and you just put them underneath and kind of hold them on, so that would hold the plant up. Once again, you have to decide if you want to look at that all winter long. So that's up to you. Arborvitaes are multi-stemmed plants that are prone to splaying open in heavy snows. And here is a plant that splayed open the previous year, right? And so now it looks kind of funky. Sometimes not only they splay open, but part of them die, they snap. And then the problem is, of course, that you've got several that are all the same and one that is shorter. This is an argument for not planting a screening that's a row of all one type of plant. Because if you have a whole row of all arborvitaes or all Leland cypress or all something else, if one gets damaged with heavy snow, you've got one that's never going to be the same. And it's kind of impossible at that point to find the same variety of arborvitae that is as big as the others to replace it. So this is an argument for planting mixed plant screening instead of all one row. Now, how about tarps? If burlap isn't that good at stopping the wind, how about something like a tarp that would keep the breeze out of there? And sometimes people will wrap a tarp around a shrub. Well, first of all, if it's an evergreen shrub, this is not a good idea, because that prevents the sun from getting to those plants. And evergreen plants do photosynthesize all winter long. So if this is an evergreen, is going to be a plant that is not going to be healthy in the spring when that tarp is removed. Not only that, but once again, because plants don't generate heat, the tarp is not keeping the plant warmer. The only thing that tarp might be doing is stopping the wind. But here's the kicker. In February, you know that the sun gets warmer, right? Think about how it is to climb into your car that's been outside, and even though it might be 20 degrees or 25 or 30 degrees outside, you climb into your car on a sunny day when the car's been in the sun, and it's hot in your car, isn't it? It's warm in your car. And so you will roll down the windows and feel ridiculous that you're rolling down the windows on such a cold day. The same thing happens to tarp-covered plants. Starting when the days get longer in January, the heat builds up in the day under that tarp, but it doesn't stay there at the night. And so you've got plants that are completely confused and are getting too warm in the day and then cold at night. And you are likely to have more winter damage from that tarp covered hydrangea on the left than you are from the uncovered hydrangea on the right. So it's not successful. It's still cold in a polar vortex, and it's too warm in February. And here's an example of a plant that some well-meaning landscaper built a huge wooden framework and covered this plant with a tarp. And when it was uncovered in the spring, the plant was dead because A, it was evergreen, it wasn't getting any sun during the winter. B, it was getting too warm in the day and too cold at night. So that was a dead plant. That was an expensive investment that failed. So don't use tarps, all right? If you are covering a plant, it needs to breathe. You can't use plastic. You can't use, tarps that it's not going to let the air flow. It's going to be too hot in the day and too cold at night. Some years ago, I found these baskets actually on a website in Great Britain. They were made out of bamboo, and they offered just enough protection to either hold pine needles inside there and, keep heavy snows off of certain plants so they didn't get smushed. And I thought they were wonderful. I wish somebody would bring these to market again. The year I tried to use these on my hydrangeas, however, this was not successful because once again, it didn't keep these plants warmer. And the problem with hydrangeas is if the temperature gets too cold, the buds freeze. We'll talk about that a little more in a minute. We're going to talk about hydrangeas specifically in a minute. Now let's talk about marginally hardy perennials, because this is one place where winter protection can really make a difference, okay? And what you want for marginally hardy perennials is some sort of mulch that is light in weight, allows for breathing, okay, but will keep the air stable around those plants. Pine needles, excellent mulch for marginally hardy perennials. The mainly mulch or straw, excellent for those marginally hardy perennials. This was a particular year. This plant was marginally hardy. And by the way, don't cut anything that's marginally hardy, or frankly, any perennial down. If you cut it down, it's harder to bring it through the winter. If you leave it up, that's easier to leave it through the winter. But in this case, I used one of those bamboo protections, and I put straw in here around the plant without cutting it down, and it successfully brought this plant through the winter time. You could use a thick layer of hay on top of marginally hardy perennials. You could even use some floating row cover. That is a product that we sell at Country Garden, and that kind of can create a little greenhouse, particularly in the springtime for those plants. But your perennials that are hardy in a zone 6 or lower don't need protection. So if you're worried about a plant, Google it to see what zone it is in, all right? And if it is hardy in a zone 6 or a 5 or a 4, you do not have to cover those. I remember when I first moved to the Cape, I used hay over my entire perennial garden to protect it. And after a couple of years of that, I realized I was wasting my time because most of those plants do not need protection, especially if you're not cutting them down. If you leave your perennials in the ground, first of all, the tops of the perennials offer some protection. They catch some leaves that offer some protection. And number 2, they offer places for wildlife and insects to either feed or hang out. So by all means, you can leave perennials for the snow to fall on them and they will be fine. And plants in nature, we always have to look at how nature is doing it all on her own, right? Nature doesn't go in and cut down the perennial plants and then pile some, hay on top of them. No, this is what nature does. The perennials stay there in the ground and they catch the snow, and there's my dog Sparky. They catch the snow, and that's how nature handles the protection over the winter. So we need to take a hint, right? Now, Susan contacted Country Garden earlier and asked about, what about my new wildflowers? Well, first of all, wildflower mixes oftentimes are high in annuals for the first year. They have seeds for perennials in them often, but a lot of the first year plants are annuals. This wildflower mix that you're looking at is mostly annuals, all right? So those aren't gonna come back anyway, number one. Number two, you don't wanna cut your wildflower meadow back until spring for several reasons. First of all, the birds eat the seeds, number one. Number two, the seeds fall to the ground, and if you haven't cut the wildflowers down, then those seeds stand a better chance of being protected and staying there so that they will sprout next year. And number three, even the dying dead annuals up on top protect the young perennials that are down below. So for a wildflower, the best protection is to leave it alone all winter long, and then sometime in late April, before the plants start to put on much growth, that's when you cut it back. That's when you can chop it off. Newly planted broadleaf evergreens like holly and rhododendrons and skip laurel and mountain laurel. If you have plants like that you have planted this year, wilt-proof might be a good idea. Wilt-proof is a product that seals some of the surface of the leaves so that they don't lose as much moisture through the leaves. And, it's not that we need to do this with every rhododendron, okay? Because as you drive around Cape Cod, you see a lot of big rhododendrons and they look like they're in great shape, right? Because they are in great shape. Because as we mentioned before, they know how to protect themselves in the wintertime. But a newly planted plant does not have a great root system, okay? It is not as hunkered down, shall we say, for the winter as plants that are firmly established. And so wilt-proof can be a good idea for newly planted evergreens. And you get it at this time of year. You would spray it sometime in November. The next couple of weeks are perfect because you want to spray it when it's about 50 degrees or a little warmer. So look for a day when, we're going to have a whole day without rain and we're going to be able to spray when it's around 45, 50 degrees, and you can spray those newly planted evergreens with wilt-proof. Grasses, people ask about grasses. Should I cut them back? At this time, you would be safe to cut grasses back. I usually don't advise cutting them in September because you're more likely to lose them to crown rot if you cut them back early and then the fall rains and wet weather keeps the crown constantly wet, and you can have grasses die in the middle as a result. From about mid-November on, you are safe to cut them if you want. But I'm going to suggest to you that first of all, those grasses are really pretty attractive still in November and December, aren't they? Number two, you can bind them up, right? So that they're not flopping all over the place and they're still quite attractive. And if you want, you can put bows on them for the holidays, be it Thanksgiving or whatever you want. You can wrap them up so that they have almost an agricultural or a bee skip kind of look here. And then when you are ready, you take what you are using and you cut them down here about 12 inches from the ground and haul the tops away. Now we are going to get to our favorite topic, those blue hydrangeas, because we love them. right? We love them and we want them to flower well. Now, on years when we have a really, really heavy snow, that helps protect our hydrangeas. Remember 2015, where from the end of January until into April, it didn't stop snowing? Well, that year, the hydrangeas were very nicely protected by the snow. But here's the thing about hydrangeas. In September, this is a shot taken in September. You see that little bud right there? That is the germ of next year's flower. That, if it makes it through the winter, is going to grow up into a stem with a flower on the end of it. So the whole thing about hydrangeas is that those buds need to make it through the winter. There are some hydrangeas that are a little more bud hardy than others. And an example of that is Endless Summer is a little more bud hardy than my Glowing Embers. In fact, I'm about to dig my Glowing Embers up and toss it away because it only blooms once every 7 years, and that's not good enough. So some hydrangeas are a little more bud hardy, but these buds, when the temperatures go much below 10 degrees Fahrenheit, they are in danger. If they make it through the winter, they will sprout in the spring. This is a picture taken in mid-May on one of my hydrangeas. And this is a good news picture because every one of those green buds you see is going to become a stem with a flower on the end of it. Yeah, the buds may be a little bit damaged. See the black edges there? By the time these, really open up and get growing, nobody's going to notice that. So all fine, but this is all on its own. I did not do anything to protect this. And sometimes people say, well, could I spray wilt-proof on these to protect them? And the answer is unfortunately no. Wilt-proof does not put a warming somehow winter coat around those buds. Wilt-proof prevents loss of moisture, but those buds get zapped not from loss of moisture, but from cold temperatures that go much below 10 degrees. And I know that when I see in the wintertime a forecast that it's going to go down to 10 or 5, I know we're in hydrangea danger, okay? And if it goes below 0, even the most bud hardy of blue hydrangeas get damaged. And frankly, there's nothing much we can do. We have seen, all hydrangea people have seen, that in a winter that goes down to 0 or below, the protection doesn't help. I'm sorry to tell you that, but it is true. Do what you want to do for your peace of mind. If you want to put up stakes and burlap and hay and leaves and whatever, if you need to do it just so that you can tell yourself that you've done everything possible, by all means, go for it. But I have found for me, prayer works as well as anything else. And so I am not going to spend my time putting up stakes and burlap and, because if it's a warmer winter, it's not needed. They don't bloom any better if I do it in a warmer winter, right? And then I have to take it all away before they break dormancy too early because the sun in that covering keeps them a little bit too warm. So I have decided I will enjoy all of my hydrangeas, how they are in the winter, all on their own in a natural look. And if they make it, they make it. And if they don't, they don't. The good news is that we only have a hydrangea kill winter, at least in the past. It's been about every 7 to 9 years. I have lived through 3 or 4 of them now since I moved to the Cape in '93. So it doesn't always happen, all right? So let's talk a little bit about some things going in an unheated garage. This is my garage in the winter, and I've got, I've got hydrangeas in pots. I've got fig trees in an unheated garage. My unheated garage will get on the coldest days down to around 40 degrees in there but it never goes below freezing. So I can keep plants in there that otherwise would not make it through the winter, including agapanthus and figs, and the my amaryllis are in there, and hydrangeas and all of that. And I will tell you, if you do this, these are some hydrangeas, if you do this, all of those plants are going to break dormancy early before it's, ready to put them out. So the hydrangeas and the figs and everything in the garage is going to break dormancy in March, and you can't put them outside in March when they look like this. So then you will have to be sure to water them and keep them going well, and then introduce them into the real sunlight gradually. So everybody needs to decide, how much work do you want to do to protect your plants? Okay. How much work do you want to do? And what do you want to see? Because personally, I don't want to be looking at this all winter long, but that's an individual decision and you can decide. Now, before we come back to answer your questions, I just want to mention, this is what I want to see, right? I want to see nature. I want to see how nature shows off her stuff all winter time. And if some of those plants die, they die. And I also want to encourage you to check out the Hyannis Country Garden events page, because you know what? We've got all kinds of holiday events up there, and great creative stuff going on. So go to the website, check it out, sign up. I hope to see you at some of my events, and other people are doing other fun stuff. So I hope to see you there. All right, so let's get out of this, and I am going to open my chat again so that I can see, and we're going to come, and I'm going to go right up to the top where we started so that I can answer the questions as they came in. Do astilbes need to be cut back? No, not necessarily. As I mentioned, I think a lot perennials really are more, they're better suited to staying. And, there are some people that just can't stand to have it up when they're brown. My friend Stephanie Foster, she said that she doesn't cut any perennials back because snow needs something to fall on. So it's up to you, but I would say leave them and then cut them back in the spring. Is it too late to transplant an 8-foot established red maple? No, if you're going to water the roots once a week through December. If you're going to be able to water it, if it doesn't rain, go for it. Otherwise, it's a little dicey, because if we get, if we have suddenly 3 sunny weeks without any rain, it's going to need watering. I would say you're probably better off this year than in the past, because we've had a nice moist summertime. And so I think probably you'd be better off this year if you want to do it now than in other years when they've been through drought. But be prepared to put some water on it if it hasn't rained, okay? And do it soon. Don't wait until December. I have a young Japanese maple still in a pot about 3.5 feet tall. Plant it. If you want, you could put it in an unheated garage, but you could either plant it in place, or if you want to keep it in the pot, dig a hole that accommodates the pot, put the pot in the hole, let it go through the winter, and then you can take it out and do whatever you want with it later. But just having it in the ground is the best insulator for anything in a pot. I relocated from Central Mass, always applied wilt-proof late fall to protect rhodies, azaleas, boxwood, and holly. Do you recommend using it here? I recommend using it on newly planted plants or on plants that have been drought stressed over the previous summer. We have not had a drought stressed summer, so I don't think you have to do it on all of your established plants. Look around as you drive around the Cape at all the huge rhododendrons that you see, right? Nobody is spraying those with wilt-proof. But newer plants, yes, or plants that have been stressed in the past summer, yes. Or plants that you've transplanted recently. If you're transplanting a rhododendron or have transplanted it recently, by all means use wilt-proof on those plants. How effective is landscape fabric as a wrap? Not any more or less effective as burlap. Depends on, what you're wrapping it for. It would be very effective for salt spray. It's not I don't think it, because it also, it breathes, it's not that effective for wind protection unless maybe you doubled it. Should I protect catmint that is close to the road? Should I cut it back now too? You can either leave it or cut it back. That is up to you. I don't think you have to protect it. You don't, catmint isn't particularly prone to salt damage. If you are on a really, really busy road where they salt a lot, maybe you'd want to lay, you know, some burlap just over the top of it to keep the salt on the burlap instead of on the plant. But other than that, I don't think that you need to protect it. I'm glad Donna loves my glasses. How about these, right? These are my Zoom glasses. And I thought they were bold too. I love them. Okay, fun. Let's see. Is rosemary considered marginally hardy here? Yes, it is, unless you live right on the ocean in Chatham or Truro or Orleans, or if you're on the vineyard. Some varieties of rosemary are hardy, but if it goes much, you know, below, again, 5 degrees Fahrenheit, they are not. So if you want to take a chance, and it's in the ground in a pot, it won't be hardy. But if you want to take a chance and it's in the ground, leave it and see what happens. Wrapping it doesn't help because they need to breathe. So just know that about it. The good news is rosemary grow really quickly, and in the spring they're inexpensive. So if you leave it out, and you're certainly going to be able to harvest it through December because our Decembers are so mild. And then if it gets zapped, you know, with a real cold spell, oh, well, you tried it and you can plant another. So rosemary isn't something that I usually stress about. What marginally hardy perennials are in your garden? Not many anymore. Right now I have, I'll tell you what I've got right now in my garden that's marginally hardy, which is Salvia mexicana. It is a warm zone 7 plant. I am planning on leaving it just to see what happens. I am probably not going to protect it. I'm going, as I say, I don't like the look of upholstery in my garden, so I'm not going to protect it. I am going to, you know, leave it and see what happens. In the past, I have protected Salvia black and blue. That's a warm zone 7 plant, and in a warmer winter, I have kept that. And I have kept certain banana trees planted in the ground alive with protection as well. I don't do it anymore, but there you go. Are 4 o'clocks marginally hardy? I would say that they are probably not hardy. If you want to, if they're still up and you haven't cut them back, by all means, if you want to leave them and pile some you know, pine needles or something over them and see, because they have fairly big tubers, if the ground doesn't freeze, they might make it. So what have you got to lose, right? With a 4 o'clock, what have you got to lose? You might as well see. And our ground has not been freezing much more than an inch in recent winters. And so a lot of people have gotten away with their gladiolas and their dahlias still in the ground. My gladiolas made it through last winter. I'm not pulling them up this winter. I'm going to see if they come back again. What should I do with a clematis planted in a very large winter-safe pot? Well, it should be all right. Don't cut it back. I would leave the tops to do what they do. They might die back, but most clematis are pretty hardy. Okay, I grew clematis in the ground when I lived in a zone 4. And the general rule for something in a pot is if it is hardy 2 zones colder from where you are, it can stay in the pot. Now you might want to put that pot in a protected spot, perhaps on a south side of your house, up against the house, where it would be just a little more protected. That certainly wouldn't hurt, but I think it should be fine. Should you wilt-proof a new small panicle hydrangea? No, you know, any deciduous plant that loses its foliage, they don't lose that much moisture through their stems. And wilt-proof isn't going to provide, if we have some sort of extreme polar vortex again that might cause some dieback, the wilt-proof isn't going to make the difference. Okay, how do I protect my rosemary? It's in the ground next to the foundation. Can I leave it in the ground? I think we just covered rosemary. It's protection isn't going to really help. If you wanted to put some stakes with maybe some burlap for wind protection, but I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth it. Leave it open so you can go and cut it all through December and enjoy it, and then plant again. Deer are eating my hydrangea leaves now. Deer love hydrangeas. And there are 2 times a year that I spray my hydrangeas with Plant Skid. And I'm going to type it in I'm going to type it in chat here for everybody. PLANTSKYDD. And you want to always use the liquid because it is the most effective, and you spray it right on plants. Okay. Plant Skid is the longest lasting and the best deer and rabbit repellent there is. And so by all means, if you have anything that the deer have been eating, spray it with Plant Skid, and I would do it now, right? And usually when I spray mine now in November, the deer leave it alone all winter long. Use the liquid, spray it really well, and know that it's blood, and so it looks like a murder has taken place, but it will work. It will work on your plants. Now I'm going to answer 2 more questions, and then we have to go for the night because we're all going to have dinner. But know this, any question that I have not answered so far, I will save the chat and I will answer it on the Country Garden blog either tomorrow or on Monday morning. Okay, so you will get your question answered on the blog. Can you or should you bring lavender indoors in the fall? If you are growing Spanish lavender or some of the French lavenders, they are not hardy here, you should bring them in. If, however, you are growing phenomenal lavender or Munstead or Hidcote, those are varieties that are hardy, and I would have them in the ground, not in pots. They would not be good in pots because they are not hardy 2 zones colder. So, but I would leave them outside. And you could bring a lavender, you could leave a lavender outside, into December even, and then bring it into an unheated garage like those fig trees, and then put it out in the springtime. That's another way that you could handle a lavender if it's in a pot. But if you have lavender in the ground, just leave it, all right? And let's take this as maybe our last question. Last winter, I lost a couple of boxwood. I replaced them. How can I help my new ones survive the winter? Spray them with Plant Skid in the next week. Not Plant Skid, I'm sorry. Spray them with wilt proof in the next couple of weeks, all right? And hopefully we will not have that polar vortex winter that, killed off or damaged so many things. But spray them with wilt proof. Oh, we still have a couple minutes. Is this a good time to dig up dahlias? Do it this weekend. All right, dig your dahlias this weekend. Yes. Is Russian sage considered marginally hardy? No, Russian sage is a hardy perennial, but don't cut it back. It's much more winter tough, winter hardy when it is allowed to stay the stems all winter. And then in the spring, when it starts to break dormancy, you can see what died back on top, but what's alive down below. And that's when you cut Russian sage back. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I will get to questions that we haven't gotten to on the Country Garden blog. I'm saving the chat right now, number 1. Number 2, I will get to any questions that anybody typed on Facebook Live. I will put those answers on the Country Garden blog in the next couple of days. I hope you have a great weekend, and we're all hoping for a mild winter. And I hope that I see a lot of you at the events that we have coming up at Hyannis Country Garden. So go to their website, hyanniscountrygarden.com, and check it out. Take care, everybody.